Mr. Mansour, you mentioned our Prime Minister many times in your speech, your long speech. I want to remind you the words of our former Prime Minister, Golda Meir, who served 50 years ago in this position, and she said that peace will come when you will love your children more than you hate us. Mr. President, a bright young couple in their 20s were in the prime of their lives dedicated to diplomacy. Yaron Lishinsky and Sarah Lynn Milgram were stars in Israel's foreign service, working in the diplomatic team at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. They were deeply in love. Yaron was planning to propose to Sarah this week in Jerusalem, but they never made it to Jerusalem. A week ago, last Wednesday night, as they were leaving an event for young diplomats hosted by the Capital Jewish Museum, they were shot dead, murdered by a terrorist screaming, "Free Palestine, free Palestine." This was a targeted anti-Semitic assassination of two Israeli diplomats on American soil. This was anti-Semitic terrorism of the most horrific order. It was an act of pure evil. The animal who pulled the trigger was just the final link in a chain of incitement that stretches across social media, across university campuses, across valleys, and yes, across the floor of this very council. The blood of Yaron and Sarah is not only on the shooter's hands, it is on every official, every influencer, every academic, every anti-Semite, every so-called expert who has spent the last 19 months portraying Israel as a genocidal regime and terrorists as freedom fighters. But we cannot talk about such recklessness without talking about Mr. Tom Fletcher, who sat here a few weeks ago. Mr. Fletcher has assumed the role of moral preacher. His speeches and statements drip with pomposity and self-righteousness, but not a shred of responsibility. Just a few weeks ago, in this chamber, he accused Israel of genocide. I have demanded the retract of this baseless and vile accusation, but he has not so far. As if that was not outrageous enough, he declared just 2 days before Yaron and Sarah's murder that, quote, and I quote him directly, "There are 14,000 babies in Gaza that will die in the next 48 hours. And you should have seen the way he spoke, like he has some information that we don't have. That claim was a lie. It had no basis in fact, and yet it was broadcast across social media, fueling the already terrible anti-Semitism. Of course, as we all know, 14,000 babies did not die in those 48 hours, but 2 innocent Jews did. Mr. Fletcher was forced to retract that lie after the BBC corrected him. But retractions don't put the bullets back in the gun. They don't bring back Yaron and Sarah. They don't erase the damage done by those who slander the Jewish state without a second thought, without thinking before speaking. Mr. Fletcher, when you engage in blood libels, do not act surprised when blood is spilled in the streets. This is what happens when anti-Semitic propaganda is filtered through the language of human rights. That is what happens when terms like genocide are thrown around like political weapons, stripped of meaning and used to demonize Jews. This council has become a megaphone for that hate, a place where the worst actors in the international system use the banner of justice to justify violence, a place where the representative of Libya can sit at this very table and desecrate the memory of the Holocaust by calling Gaza, and I quote, 21st century Holocaust. That isn't just distortion, it is Holocaust denial. And yet, there was no condemnation for most of you sitting here. You faced no consequences. At the United Nations, statements like that are tolerated and sometimes even applauded. But don't mistake the applause for morality. Words have consequences. And the murder of two young Israeli diplomats is not detached from what happens in this room. It is the logical end of your narrative. The people who chant from the river to the sea are not separate from the people who sit here in suits and ties and accuse Israel of genocide. They are part of the same machine. One provides the lies, the other pulls the trigger. Unfortunately, Mr. Fletcher is not the exception, he is the rule. He is representative of a class of UN officials and so-called neutral experts who have built careers out of moral posturing while taking no responsibility for the consequences of their words. They are very good at that. They speak in sound bites, they issue dramatic proclamations, and then when those proclamations incite hate and violence, they vanish. They deny any role in the bloodshed. Well, we will not let them evade responsibility. We will expose them. Even a day ago, I think Mr. Fletcher came with another provocation. He said 10,000 trucks are waiting to enter Gaza. I don't know if you saw that, only recently. You know what will happen if you line up 10,000 trucks from the border of Gaza? The line will go all the way to Lebanon. So how can you throw numbers like that? You can say there are issues, you can say about public, but saying 14,000 babies, 10,000 trucks, genocide, so easy. Mr. President, while the UN spreads panic and makes declarations detached from reality, the State of Israel is steadily facilitating the entry of aid into Gaza via two methods. First, under the old framework via trucks, and second, under the new distribution mechanism developed in coordination with the US and key international partners. As of now, both mechanisms are working simultaneously and will continue to do so for the immediate future. We are not only allowing aid in, but we are ensuring it reaches the people who need it most. Just this Monday, for example, 170 trucks carrying humanitarian aid entered Gaza through Kerem Shalom crossing. These trucks delivered food, medical supplies, and vaccines. Every single delivery was carefully coordinated to prevent looting by Hamas. Since May 19, almost 9,000 tons of aid have entered Gaza, again carrying food, medical supplies, flour for bakeries, and baby formula. In recent weeks, 4 new aid distribution centers have been established inside Gaza. These centers are operated by international humanitarian organizations and secured by a US civilian security company. They were created to serve one purpose: to ensure aid gets to civilians, not terrorists. 2 of these centers, located in Tel El Sultan in Rafah and the Morag Corridor, began operations yesterday. They are already distributing food packages to thousands of families in need. This is happening despite Hamas's attempts to block civilians reaching the aid by establishing checkpoints and roadblocks. Because Hamas knows if it loses control over the aid, it loses control over the people of Gaza. You know, let's ask ourselves what happened after. Have we heard any condemnation from the UN? Not one word, no statement. But that silence is not the end of the story. It gets worse. The United Nations has once again picked the wrong side. Today, I reveal shocking information. Not only has the UN refused to condemn Hamas for its efforts to sabotage the new aid centers. We have seen the pictures of Hamas blocking people. But the UN is now actively joining Hamas in trying to block that aid. The UN is using threats, intimidation, and retaliation against NGOs that choose to participate in the new humanitarian mechanism. A number of major international NGOs made a decision to take part in the new aid initiative. They decided to ignore the UN's calls for a boycott. They are allowed to do it. They said, we want to give it a try. We want to help this new mechanism. They chose to act because they truly care about what happened. The UN's response was brutal. It was mafia-like. Without any discussion, without due process, the UN removed those NGOs from the shared aid database. That database, I want to remind you, is a central system for tracking aid deliveries into Gaza. It was created and approved under a UN General Assembly resolution. But those NGOs, they were frozen out. This is the gravest violation of the UN's own principles. It is the extortion of well-meaning NGOs that refuse to kiss the ring. It is a shakedown by UN mobsters. How can they do that? If you don't want to participate, I think it's a mistake. I think there is room for humanitarian aid from all directions at this stage, but to actually threaten NGOs not to collaborate with this new mechanism, I urge the UN, do not let your egos get in the way. Cooperate with the new mechanism. It has begun and it is operational. Shift your focus from dramatic press statements and intimidating NGOs to the work you are supposed to be doing. Mr. President, negotiations for the release of our hostages are ongoing as we speak. We accepted the last offer on the table, but Hamas said no. It is Hamas that has refused every credible offer. It is Hamas that continues to use human beings, our hostages, who they have cruelly held for 600 days now, as currency. But the international pressure remains fixed on Israel, not the terrorists. That pressure only plays into Hamas's hands. It strengthens the terrorists. It prolongs the war. With this pressure, you are not advancing peace, you are advancing Hamas. Still, the simple fact remains that there can be no progress until all our hostages are released. Everyone. No statement, no resolution, no futile conference at the UN will change this. We are committed to bringing them home, through negotiations if possible, through military pressure if necessary. But we will not leave them behind. We will not apologize for defending our people from those who will destroy us. No matter how many lies are told, no matter how many blood libels are spread, we will continue to fight for the lives of our citizens and for the future of our people. Thank you, Mr. President.